Before we get into today's stories, visit dreadsarmy.com to sign up for the Dread Weekly newsletter so you don't miss out on any updates. Also, check out all of the channels in the Dread Network on dreadsarmy.com or in the description below. Thanks for listening. Now let's get to the stories. I have a story for you that's, well, it's something else. It happened at Starved Rock State Park here in Illinois. It was only a couple years back. I was there for a hike during the fall of the year. Less tourists during that time of year, so I had most of the park to myself, though I had my German Shepherd Max along for company. My usual route's a hilly 5-mile hike along the river. Now, on the day I'm telling you about, we'd been hiking for a couple of hours, and we're doing our last loop around the river trails. You know, just enjoying the wild serenity of the place, when Max began behaving oddly. Instead of darting about up ahead as usual, he was staying close. His ears perked up, and I swear, his eyes were practically glowing. He'd look over his shoulder constantly like he was expecting something to leap out from the trees. Initially, I thought that maybe he just caught scent of a squirrel or something. But then a weird smell hit my nostrils. It's hard to describe, but was something like sulfur. Something burning almost, but there were no signs of fire nearby. Whatever its source, it was strange and unpleasant. I've never come across anything like it before or since. We moved ahead, unease creeping up, when Max began growling softly, like he does when he wants to warn me of something. Now, when you're alone in the wilderness, even with a 100-pound German Shepherd, such a warning gets your heart racing. We reached a clearing that has this magnificent overlook. It's a great spot to rest, and I figured we could take a short break. But as we stepped into the clearing, both Max and I froze. A chill ran down my spine. I had this strange sensation. It was as if something else was there, though I could not see anything that would validate my thoughts. Max was still growling, although now it was louder and accompanied by an occasional whimper. I didn't need him to tell me we weren't alone. I remember swallowing my fear, trying to keep my tone steady as I called Max to my side. Ever so gingerly, I moved further into the clearing, my senses on high alert. As I ventured deeper, the smell intensified, making its way into my lungs and making me want to retch. And then, something unnatural brushed against the otherwise normal sounds of the wilderness. It was oddly soft and raspy at the same time. But more disturbing was a low, malevolent growl that vibrated under it. Then, just ahead of me, I saw something. I blinked, trying to make out the details but having no luck. The shape of it shimmered in a distorted manner, as though the creature was surrounded by heat waves or something. I was too far away to accurately identify the creature, though I could make out an outline that was both terrifying and bizarre. Something about it screamed wrong. This unexplained monstrosity was so out of place in the serene nature of the Starved Rock Park. By now, Max was whining, his tail lowered and body pressed against my legs. Even in the dim light, I could see the fear in his eyes reflecting my own. A million thoughts were racing through my mind. What was that thing? What did it want? A primal part of me wanted to bolt, instinct screaming danger. All I knew was that the usual serenity of our beloved park was disrupted by the presence of this alien creature. I was standing there frozen, trying to wrap my head around what I was seeing. Suddenly, the thing moved. It lurched from the tree line into the pale moonlight, and I saw it, really saw it. It was nothing like I could have ever expected. The creature, or demon as I can only describe it, was around 6 feet tall, but that's not the half of it. The body of it was dark, black even, with a vaguely human shape, but all wrong. Not like an animal or a person, but a strange mixture of the two. It had this grotesque sort of skeletal exterior, almost like an insect. The skin of it seemed scaled and rough, and there were wings. They looked like the wings of a bat. I could see right through the thin membrane-like skin in the moonlight. But its face was the worst of it, like some demonic horse or goblin. The eyes, they glowed, bright red, just glowing in the moonlight. It had this long, disgusting tongue lolling out of its mouth. I can still remember those eyes staring at me. Max was losing it, whining and growling. His entire body churned with fear and protective aggression. As for me, I was so scared I couldn't move. All I could think of was the absurd creature straight from a nightmarish horror story that was standing in front of me. Part of me was sure it couldn't be real, but then there I was, staring straight at it. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it disappeared. I blinked, and it was just gone, vanished into the thin air as if it had never been there. Max and I stood alone in the ominous silence. The sulfur smell lingered, but the beast, whatever it was gone, leaving us both terrified and drenched in cold sweat. I will never forget that night. Every time I hike into Starved Rock, the memory of that encounter resurfaces. Max and I, we still go though. But now, every rustle, every sound from the unknown depths of the woods, it all raises my hackles. The park's calm serenity could no longer disguise the memory of this monstrous intruder. I've looked up the creature online, and the closest thing that fits the bill is something called the Jersey Devil, though the location is wrong. I don't know what else it could be. I don't know what belief is left in me for folklore, but I do know what I saw. It was real, and it was out there. And whether or not I'll encounter it again, I don't know. I want to tell you about an odd experience I had. It happened maybe 2 or 3 years ago now, at Silver Falls State Park out in Oregon. Beautiful place, you gotta go if you've never been there. But if you do, I hope you are ready for adventure, because I ran into something out there that I never thought existed. Not in a million years. It was just another average day for me, having some me time away from the hustle and bustle of life. In hindsight, I wonder if the beauty, the serenity of the place, is in part what made the whole thing so unnerving. I went there for a bout of soul searching. You know, one of those periods in life where you need to take a breather and just experience something else. I was hiking along this trail that wound through the dense forest. I was taking my time, breathing in the crisp, fresh air. I was making my way to the falls when I saw something strange in the distance. There's a tunnel near the falls, where the trail actually goes behind it. It makes for an incredible view. That's where I was headed. I was about halfway to the falls when I saw it. Amidst the tranquility of the environment, something felt very off. At first, I thought I noticed a figure, a shadowy object, that really didn't seem to fit into the natural surroundings. But thinking about it, it wasn't the sight that struck me first. It was the smell. A sour, pungent stench hit me like a punch in the gut. So much so that I had to stop dead in my tracks. It was off-putting, to say the least, and it caught me completely off guard. Now, the smell had my senses heightened and my curiosity piqued. At first, I figured it could have been a long-deceased animal maybe. But the second thing that got me was the noise. I heard this strange sound through the trees, a sort of deep grunt, like the growl of something big. If you've ever heard a bear grumbling, it was somewhat like that. Only it felt way too close for comfort. I decided to press forward a bit more. I wasn't sure if what I heard was real or not. The sense of unease was with me with each step I took, but I continued down the trail. The smell was growing stronger, and though the scenery became even more beautiful as I got closer to the falls, the atmosphere became thicker, dampening my earlier enthusiasm. I came to the edge of the woods, near the tunnel that leads behind the falls. The strange stench was at its strongest here. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. It was something large, hidden in the shadows near the mouth of the tunnel, beyond where the daylight could reach. And whatever it was definitely alive. I cupped my hand over my mouth to stifle the reaction to the atrocious smell, and squinted my eyes, desperately trying to make out what I was staring at. My heart pounded in my chest, and I remember feeling lightheaded, wondering if maybe I had inadvertently stumbled upon a bear, or perhaps some other large wild animal. The figure was difficult to make out in the shadows, but it was undoubtedly large, incredibly so, and it was moving in an odd, hulking manner. And then, out of the shadows stepped something inexplicable. A creature, a being, I'm still hesitant to believe was real. It was enormous, and I mean big. We're talking around 9 feet tall easily. Its enormousness was eerie. It was solid, hulking, like a slab of living stone. Its body was covered in dense brownish-red hair. The face was the strangest part. It had a broad, flat nose with wide, flaring nostrils, bulging cheekbones and thick brows above deep-set eyes. They were almost human, but not quite. I'll never forget those eyes. Even in the dim light, they sparked a fear in me that I'd never felt before. The jaw was strong and pronounced, jutting out with evident power. And from its mouth, I could see oversized teeth. Suddenly, it let out a deep, earth-shaking howl, like nothing I'd heard before. The sound thrummed in my chest and echoed in my skull. I felt a sense of primal fear, a sensation I'd only read about but never truly experienced. There seemed to be no aggression in the beast, but nevertheless, I was frozen in place. Unthinking, I stumbled backward, maintaining eye contact until I tripped, falling hard onto the ground. The last thing I saw was a fleeting glimpse of the creature's reddish form as it disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel. I made it out of the forest as fast as my trembling legs could carry me. The park, which had been my serene refuge, had unveiled a darker side that day. Post-incident, my mind stayed stuck on the encounter. There was a sense of unrest gnawing at me in the quiet hours of the night. It was almost as if, by venturing out into the woods that day, I'd crossed an invisible line into a world I never knew existed, a world that I was ill-prepared for. I tried to rationalize it, debated whether it was a hallucination or not, but the memory remains, clear and vivid as the day it happened. I began to scour the internet, seeking anyone else who might have had a similar encounter. I found story after story of people who had had encounters just like mine, encounters with the creature known as Sasquatch or Bigfoot. I never believed in such things, but the memories of that day tell me otherwise. I'll never forget the day I encountered something almost beyond explanation. It was a sunny afternoon in Custer State Park, South Dakota, a place untouched by the taint of city pollution, home to the kind of peace you only realize you've missed when you're finally in the midst of it. So there I was, standing among the emerald canopies and rugged landscapes. While it might not seem like it, the Black Hills are the start of the Rockies. The mountains here aren't as massive, but they are unique and definitely worth exploring if you get the chance. But a lot of the visitors here come for the wildlife. I'd cross paths with coyotes, bison, elk, even bobcats. My day started like any other. I had breakfast, did a little bird watching. You've probably heard about the park's famous bird watching spots. I mean, with over 200 species calling this park home, it's pretty hard to miss the buzz. For me, it's not about the numbers. It's about the rare chance to step into the world of these wild creatures. Looking back, bird watching was probably what kept me sane throughout my life. There's something strangely therapeutic about watching these creatures go about their daily routines. I decided on a hike that day. Stratobold Trail seemed like the perfect choice for its beautifully diverse landscapes. It had been a few hours into the hike when it happened. Just as I was coming around a bend in the trail, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye gave me pause. At first glance, it seemed to be just a large bird of some sort. However, a closer inspection roused my curiosity. There was something peculiar about its form. It was shrouded beneath the thick foliage, flickering sporadically as it moved. It was, in a word, odd. The normal chirping and rustling sounds of the forest seemed to fade out, replaced by an almost deafening silence. The kind of silence that was all-engulfing, that made you hyper-aware that there was something going on that shouldn't be. A sense of unease began to crawl up my spine. Still, I stood there watching the thing in the bushes. Its movements had a languid, almost mesmerizing quality to them, making it hard to ID the creature. One moment it seemed to be the size of a hawk. The next it resembled something closer to a deer. Its figure seemed fluid, morphing in sync with the shadowy veil of the forest. Was I looking at some kind of shapeshifter? I was acutely aware that I was likely in danger. I don't know why I stayed there. Maybe it was my curiosity, my need to know what was going on. As I continued to watch, a feeling washed over me. The air seemed to hum with an unseen energy, hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. It was like being under the gaze of a predator, and that's when I saw its eyes, or at least what I assumed to be its eyes. They were alien, dark, but the space surrounding them seemed to glow. I've never seen anything like them before. There was an intelligence in those eyes. I could tell that much. Mesmerized, I found myself stepping closer under the creature's watchful gaze. Unexpectedly, a soft chiming sound broke the silence, emanating from the creature's location. It was like no bird song I had ever heard. Was this creature trying to communicate? Conscious of my racing heart, I stood planted in my spot, every sense heightened, far from what I'd imagined my day off in Custer State Park would bring. As soon as I steeled my nerves again, readying myself to approach the peculiar figure, it disappeared into the dense undergrowth with a sudden whoosh. The forest seemed to resume its natural soundtrack, the familiar chirping of birds and rustling of leaves slowly creeping back into consciousness. The silence and the stillness felt unsettling, the forest's familiar sights and sounds echoing hollow in light of the recent events. But, as they say, curiosity killed the cat. So, I decided to venture deeper into the wilderness, following the direction in which the creature had disappeared. As apprehensive as I felt, there was no ignoring the itch of curiosity that enticed me to uncover the creature's origins. Overlaying the next few hours was an eerie sense of expectation. I couldn't leave this mystery unanswered. I'd never be able to live with myself. Each rustle of the leaves, every fleeting shadow, had me on edge. Eyeing the underbrush with renewed concentration, I ventured into the lesser explored parts of my beloved park. But alas, whatever I'd encountered earlier had seemingly vanished. Just when disappointment began to tinge my adventure, a resonating hum bounced around the forest. It was more of a feeling than a sound, kind of like when you stand too close to a working generator. There were no descriptive words for what happened next. In the blink of an eye, a deep silver sheen flashed across the dusky sky. It was as sudden as it was spectacular. I stood aghast, tracking the gleaming trail above me in the sky. There was something in the sky, but what was it? It seemed metallic in nature, but was able to change form, just like the creature with those glowing eyes from the forest earlier. At first, it looked like a snake-like creature, like a wingless dragon even. But the next moment, it was cylindrical, like some sort of flying craft. I was completely flabbergasted. Everything clicked into place for me. Whatever this thing was, spirit, monster, alien ship, it was something to do with those eyes I saw in the woods. I knew I should leave, but I couldn't help just standing there in a stupor. The object hung above me, eerily mid-air, before accelerating away at an inconceivable speed. I was completely unaware of time at that moment. Was my strange encounter mere minutes, or had I been standing there for hours? I had no idea. In what felt like a surreal haze, I stumbled back to my car. Driving back, the car radio spouted cheerfully. The world continued spinning for everyone else, oblivious of my run-in with the otherworldly entity. Too complex to grasp, the encounter challenged reality, forcing me to question the existence of a broader spectrum of life. To this day, I still don't have any answers. Was it some type of unknown creature? Personally, I don't think it was anything from this planet, but you can decide for yourself. I'm only here to give you my account. You can believe what you will. I guess to start off, I should provide a bit of context. It was about 2 years ago. My wife Amy and I had decided to take a vacation. We were both wiped out from work overload and the general stress of life, so we figured a good dose of nature would do the trick. We chose Fall Creek Falls State Park in Tennessee. To those unaware, it's an absolute beauty with dozens of springs, waterfalls, and gorges. The type of spot where you could just lose track of time, watching the birds and squirrely critters in the woods. I've got to admit I was looking forward to the scenery and the peace just as much as Amy was. She was keen on exploring, and I was all for it in the hope it would disconnect us from our everyday routine. if only for a few cherished days. We arrived there in July. The weather was just right, albeit a bit hot, but that's pretty typical of Tennessee weather. We set up our small campsite near the Spring Creek and made our plans to explore the park. Over the next few days, we went hiking, followed some nature trails, observed the local wildlife with binoculars from safe distances, and even tried some bird watching. I think we might have spotted an eagle, but I wouldn't bet my life on it. This particular night started off the same as the others. We cooked up some hot dogs on our camping stove, washed it down with a few beers, and shared the stories of our favorite moments from the day. As the fire started to die down, Amy decided to retire for the night, but I stayed out, enjoying the solitude. I added a couple of logs to the fire, pulled up my chair, and sat watching the darkness play hide and seek with the flames. The chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind created a relaxing symphony that was far more pleasing to my ears than the constant blaring horns and rattle of the city we lived in. That's when it started, as if the volume button on the night's sounds had been turned all the way down. The entire woods fell frighteningly quiet. The only sound at play now was the crackling fire and my own shallow breaths. The abrupt silence sent a chill down my spine, and I strained my ears trying to catch any semblance of life around me. I don't know how much time passed, but just as suddenly, a howl shattered the silence. It was a sound I'll never forget. It was enough to send my heart racing and have every hair on my body stand on end. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was probably only a wolf, but the pit of my stomach knew better. The sound was far more aggressive and guttural than any wolf I'd ever heard. And to further my fears, it sounded close. Too close for comfort. And then there was the smell, a sickly stench that wafted on the night air, making my eyes water and stomach churn. It was putrid, like rotting meat left out under the sun. In all my years of camping and hiking, I'd never come across anything that reeked so horribly. It was the kind of smell you can taste at the back of your throat, the type that makes you want to purge your stomach. Between the frightening silence, the soul-piercing howl, and the nauseating stench, my nerves were unraveling rapidly. My mind struggled to put together what was happening, but unfortunately, my encounter with the unknown was still not over. The shadows seemed to be playing tricks on me, moving and shifting in an unnatural way, just beyond the firelight's reach. I squinted into the darkness, my mind still trying to piece together what my eyes were taking in, but it seemed like a part of the shadows detached, forming a mass much denser and darker than its surroundings. It was big, bigger than any animal had the right to be. It appeared slightly hunched, almost like it couldn't contain its size. The fire crackled, throwing a rogue spark out, and for a second, my eyes caught a hint of yellow, a reflection perhaps, but the rational corner of my brain knew better. There were eyes staring back at me from the shadows. I stared into the black mass, willing my eyes to adjust. But the more I looked, the less I understood. Was this a trick of the shadows? Was I dreaming? I couldn't quite discern. What I did know is there was something out there watching me, but I didn't know what. I reached out for the flashlight next to me. As my shaky fingers closed around it, I found myself questioning whether shedding light on it would bring relief or just haunt my dreams for years to come. With every tainted breath I drew in, and with a sense of dread eating at me, I flicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on a horrifying figure. A dark, seemingly huge, beastly creature standing on two legs, like a man, but it wasn't. It was some sort of dog-human hybrid. Its scruffy fur coat was of a color so dark, it seemed to absorb what little light there was. The creature itself easily stood 7, maybe even 8 feet tall. Even from my distance, I could make out its broad shoulders and a muscular frame that was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. But that wasn't the most frightening part. This creature had the long snout and pronounced brow ridge of a dog. Thick whiskers twitched, and, in what I can only describe as a grotesque display, its lips pulled back into a snarl, revealing a set of deadly teeth that glinted white in the dull light. The taste in my mouth went from bile to base fear as my flashlight beam landed upon its eyes. It had deep-set eyes that glowed a furious yellow, locking onto me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. The air around me felt charged, and my skin crawled as if alert to some unseen danger. The unwelcome stench of decay seemed to grow stronger, into my nostrils, clinging to my clothes, disgusting and overbearingly nauseating. A second deep growl escaped from the creature's throat. The sound was terror personified, and it rooted me to my place. Driven by adrenaline and sheer survival instinct, I threw my flashlight at the creature and dashed towards our tent where Amy was. I yelled for her to wake up, to get her stuff, that we needed to leave ASAP. Within what seemed like an eternity, we were both in the car, tires screeching against the gravel path, as we made our hasty retreat. In the following days, I caught myself continually going over the events in my mind, the creature's horrifying image like a grisly picture that wouldn't fade away despite my best attempts. Were my eyes playing tricks on me? Was it merely a shadow born from the fear of the unknown? I may never have the answers. Eventually, I stumbled upon stories similar to mine from other campers and hikers. Stories of a creature bearing sinister eyes with a hulking form referred to as the Dogman. The validation was more horrifying than comforting. However, with time, I learned to live with that night, the memory tucked away into the corners of my mind. Only now, I'm more careful, vigilant, and respectful of the dark, misty corners I'd once taken for granted. I've got a weird story for you. Believe it or not, that's up to you. I'm just telling you what I saw. It was a beautiful sunny day in Alabama, and I was headed for Gulf State Park. I'd been needing a break from the hustle and bustle of daily life, and nothing quite does it like a bit of nature. I've been to that park more than a few times in my life, but that day felt odd from the start. The whole place seemed different, eerily quiet. Birds weren't chirping their usual tunes. Even the trees seemed quiet, as if they were afraid the wind might blow and make a noise. I remember spending the morning just walking around, trying to spot different types of birds, maybe catch a sight of a chipmunk or two. Nothing too exciting. Lunchtime found me on the shore of Lake Shelby, just sitting there, mind as serene as the water. You could almost forget the rest of the world exists when you're in a place like that. Well, at least until my stomach started growling, louder than any creature in the woods. I'd packed some sandwiches, nothing fancy, just ham and cheese. But eating it there, with the sun shining and the water lazily lapping against the shore, I swear it tasted like a 5-star meal. After eating, I even had a lazy nap under the shade of an old pine. After that glorious nap, I felt good, recharged. I decided to explore a bit more off the beaten path. Now I tend to be a bit adventurous, and that day was no different. I ventured deeper into the woods, away from the lake. It turned out to be more than I bargained for. I'd been following this sort of natural trail, pushed down by animals or wind or who knows what. The vegetation grew pretty thick, towering trees, dense underbrush, the works. Greenery's nice, but it made for a bit of a challenge to navigate. Then, right when I was about to turn back, I felt it. You know that feeling when you think someone's watching you? Yeah, that one. It's not paranoia if it turns out to be true, right? Well, what started as a feeling quickly escalated into a sense of unease, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling uncomfortably. I started to hear a deep, echoing sound in the distance. It rang through the dense vegetation. It wasn't like anything I've heard before. Not the yelp of a fox or the chatter of a squirrel. This was something else, something bigger, and I could feel it deep in my gut. Before I knew it, I saw something moving in the distance. It looked huge and broke through tree branches in its path with ease. It was beastly, and the earth seemed to tremble beneath it as it moved. Even in the filtered sunlight, I noticed a certain bulk to its form, but kept in shadow. It never came into clear view, always partially obscured by the underbrush or behind trees, remaining intriguingly elusive and all the more terrifying. The startling part came when it found a clearing. Suddenly, there was this terrible, powerful odor that wafted upwind towards me. It was stale, an acrid stench that made my nose wrinkle, like spoiled meat. It was so strong, so out of place in the clean forest air. What happened next was straight out of a childhood nightmare. I heard a gritty, guttural sound emerge from the depths of the woods. It was a growl or a roar, low in pitch but resonating through the trees. Instinctively, I backed off, heart thrumming wildly against my chest. With the onset of approaching twilight, the forest depths became increasingly shadowed. The mysterious creature remained hidden, its form nothing but a ghostly outline dwarfed by the trees. Still, despite its elusiveness, I am sure I know what it was that I saw. I don't imagine there are too many other large bipedal creatures roaming around the forest. I know it sounds impossible, but I'm sure it was a Sasquatch. I didn't wait any longer and got out of there as quickly as I could. I didn't run. I didn't want to draw attention to myself, but I didn't linger out there any longer than I absolutely had to. That encounter changed the mood of the day right on its head, and quickly too. I glanced over my shoulder every so often, expecting to see the creature again, but it never showed itself. Part of me was certainly relieved, but another part wanted a better look at the creature, just to know that my imagination wasn't getting the best of me. Every rustle, every broken twig, every falling leaf set me on edge on the return journey. It was turning dusk when I finally made it back to the car. Even in the safety of the car, every little noise had me jumping. I was never one to believe in stories of monsters or even local legends, but now I'm not so sure. I've been back to that park since the encounter, but I haven't yet ventured off trail again. Part of me wants to see what else is out there, but I have the sense to know when to leave well enough alone.